This podcast is sponsored by Toyota Prius. Go green, save the planet. Throughout our whole lives, we have read, listened, and watched myths or stories that don't exist, whether in kid stories, movies, books, etc., and those were mostly for entertainment that could have a message to tell to the audience. But that's not what we're going to talk about today. I'm talking about myths mostly made in the early ages of humanity about how the earth works, and our question for today is why? Why did the people in the early ages create these myths and stories about how the earth works instead of finding out the true answers? Well, I believe I know the answer. What motivates people to create myths in the first place is the fear of the unknown. In the early ages of humanity, we had tons of questions that early civilizations couldn't have figured out at the time, and it scared them, like, what happens when we die? How does the sun and moon work? Why do animals eat other animals? And so on. They became so paranoid that they created myths on the answers to their biggest questions. But they didn't just create these myths to calm others. Oh no, they also created these myths to calm themselves down as well. Ali Schwartz said it best in her article, "Beyond the myths we tell ourselves, big love is waiting." We busy ourselves in the well-worn paths, hallways, and structures that feel a part of who we are. This also means that they created myths and became so invested in them they actually gave them faith and illusion that the myths they created are 100% factual and true. So they came with the myth that lightning and thunder is created by the god Zeus. And they, including the creator of the myth, believe in that fact. They made themselves so busy with the myths that they created in the first place to ignore their fear of the unknown. But humanity didn't create these myths on their own. They can sometimes get inspiration from events that happen at their time. My father, Stephen Jeske, shared his opinion on the question, why societies create myths, and this is what he had to say.
People create myths when there's something they can't explain, something that doesn't make sense to them and they don't have an answer. So, for example, the Loch Ness Monster. Somebody sees something large in the water, some kind of a weird looking fish or snake or something. They can't explain it. No one knows what it is. There you go. You have the Loch Ness Monster.
Another example would be, say, a volcano erupted. Humans couldn't explain how that volcano erupted in the first place. They didn't know, and that's what scares them. They could, and have said, that the gods were angry for them for not giving them a sacrifice, or something like that, and that's why volcanoes erupt, so they think they could prevent another one, or at least say why it happened. Those types of myths couldn't have been possible if it weren't for the events early civilization witnessed in the first place. And in the article, 10 Ancient Stories and the Geological Events That May Have Inspired Them, Sarah Zelinsky explained what occurs when they witness an event. There's a natural tendency for people to exaggerate their memories, to turn a bad event into a worse one. So something like the Noah's Ark story could have been a huge flood. But not big enough to cover an entire planet. But someone witnessed that flood and had a huge imagination, and it seemed like the entire planet was covered and helped inspire the Noah's Ark story. Basically, they got afraid of what they saw and made it seem more tragic than it actually was, freaked them out, and decided to create the myths to calm them down for the fear of not knowing exactly what happened. So you're probably thinking that making myths to explain the unknown was only in the early ages of humanity. We know so much more than back then. We have science, factual evidence, and we don't just create myths about something we don't know yet. Sad to say though, we are still creating myths to explain the unknown, mostly in the technology that we've created. John Gray claims in his article, The Myth of Progress, we have inherited the faith that as the world becomes more modern, it will become more reasonable, more enlightening, more balanced. We don't know what will happen in the future from our, let's say, phones. They might have severe consequences that could change the human race forever. But we don't ever want to think about that. It scares us to think we could live in an apocalypse from our innovations we created. Terminator, anyone? Most people, sad to say, believe in the myth that as time goes on, the better it'll get with no consequences in our actions. Heck, today, people are freezing their heads when they die because they believe the future will be so good that they could bring back their dead frozen head back from the dead so they can enjoy the perfect future. They do this because they can't imagine a future in which something bad happens because of us. So they decide to believe in the myth of constant progress because they fear of the unknown future. So that is what I believe starts a myth and how people are still doing it today. Thanks for listening and have a great rest of the day.